What's good, everybody? Scoobert Dubert here for Love Music More. About to get into a conversation with Dr. Leah Bowden, percussionist, educator, scholar, and community organizer. And she got her doctorate from UC San Diego. What? Dr. Leah is so cool. She's so cool. It was a great conversation. We got to talk about everything from, the scholarly stuff, like really getting into the homework, the history, and the sheet music, and trying to find all this stuff and put it together. But then also the transformative, the performance, and the diversity, inclusion, and accessibility aspects of music that I think get under-discussed. And I also think that percussion and drums hold a very special place in terms of like cultural interchange, and also the ability to like physically interact with music. It is so... And we talk about this, so I don't want to spoil it in the conversation, but it's like you're hitting a thing and it's responding back at you. You feel the vibrations. It's an elemental human part of just existence and rhythm. It's like part of just the way our brains work. And I think that being able to talk about that with someone that is as accomplished and incredibly just learned and also practiced and also super cool. It was a really fun conversation, and I'm excited for you to go on that ride as well. I definitely ended up loving music more after that conversation. I hope you will love music more after listening to it. Before I do, I want to introduce our title sponsor though, DistroKid. They make music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists get to keep 100% of royalties and earnings. And you get a 30% off discount using our code. It helps the pod and helps you out because it's the best discount I've ever seen for DistroKid. So it's super grateful that they offered that to our guests. Go to distrokid.com/VIP/love music more to access that code. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all the major streaming services. And I love it because I don't want to deal with the accounting stuff. I just want to collaborate with artists or producers or writers or whatever and just put their email in and poof, DistroKid handles the rest. I don't have to do the accounting. DistroKid will do it. I love that. And then also, I'm able to check a little box that says leave a legacy. And what that means is that my music stays up no matter what. So if I'm in the mountains of Japan somewhere, like I want to do, and I'm not checking my emails and my credit card expires or something like that, they will keep my music up there. It's not like my music will suddenly disappear and I'll come off of a mountain or something and be like, oh my God, my career is gone. DistroKid's got your back, and I love that. So check out DistroKid, distrokid.com/VIP/love music more to get that 30% off. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. Hope it makes you love music more. What's good, everybody? Scoobert Dubert back here with Love Music More, and I'm joined with Dr. Leah Bowden. Welcome to this podcast. So excited to talk to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on.
I'm really excited because, as you can see behind me, I've got a drum kit here. I'm not very good at it, but it is like my favorite instrument, despite not being very good at it. So I'm very excited to talk about your musical journey and kind of what drew you into music, what drew you into drums and percussion, and then what continues to drive you, what continues to make you passionate about music. But yeah, so first I'd love to kind of ask that question, like what drew you to drum kit? What drew you to percussion? What was like, I want to play this in particular?
Okay, well, let me start by introducing who I am now, and then I'll check back into
love it.
The origins. Okay, so I'm a percussionist and drummer. Mm-hmm. In other words, a musician. I'm also a music educator, music scholar, and community organizer, I should say. And all of these things are very connected for me because it's not just about making music, but it's about how music can be used to build community, how music can be used in ways that are healing and constructive for individuals and communities, right? And I've been doing it quite a while. I got into music very young, and it's hard to say exactly what my motivations were, except that I was a very active child and very enthusiastic and needing and hands-on, needing creative outlets. And so I was very much into experimenting with music and other forms of art and creativity from a young age. I started on piano, but when I was 12 or so, a bunch of my girlfriends wanted to form a girl band, as we called it. And I just knew that I was going to be the drummer. I don't know
Yes.
why. It was kind of like in line with my personality. I was a little bit hyper. The drumming I just knew it was going to be therapeutic and like calming for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
somehow. And I started then. My friends unfortunately didn't stick with it, but I did.
Yes.
And I had already a lot of experience on piano, so I kind of had a musical understanding already, how to read music, how to deal with different repertoires and things, somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it wasn't like a brand new thing when I switched to drums. But yeah, like from that time, it was just so healing, especially during that very, important phase of development, like the coming of age thing, when you have a creative outlet, especially like something that's very physical that you can hear and feel and like be in the moment.
Yeah.
Those things were really great at that age. And that feeling of healing and self-expression just stuck with me, and I just wanted more of it, and that hasn't changed.
I love that. And I also love what you kind of talked about. One of the things that I love most about drums is, the physicality. It doesn't require like a electric guitar where I need the amp. I need all of these things to kind of like make it sing, or a keyboard where, you just kind of, it's nothing until it's breathed into like a sound. With drums, you are physically manipulating space, smacking something, and then the dynamics of how much you're hitting, or you feel the resonance come back at you. And I think that is
Hmm.
such a visceral instrument. It's an old instrument. It's like vocals and drums, like who came first? I don't know, but that it's like
Right.
elemental to human spirit. I love that.
Yeah, and even if you can barely hear or can't hear at all, you can
Yes,
still
so true.
experience drumming.
Yes. And I think that
So
that's a
that's
really
cool.
that's a cool thing that I don't know, people don't realize, not everybody realizes, not about like the deaf community enjoying music festivals. And they'll
Hmm.
see people, or hard of hearing, where you still feel the music. It's like there's so much that you can get out of music. And arguably greatest composer of all time, Beethoven, lost his hearing. Um,
Hmm.
there are
Kept
all these
going.
different, yeah, it's great. There's so many different ways to experience music, and none of them are wrong. One of my favorite
Yeah.
songwriting people that I worked with, he was hard of hearing. It didn't stop him at all. It didn't,
Yeah.
it was amazing.
Exactly. And that's just one example of the ways that drumming is just so accessible. You
Yeah.
know, um, it's an easy sell.
Easy sell.
You
But it's a
know,
hard
like
instrument.
it's a hard instrument, but it's an easy sell. Like if you
Yeah.
want people to come out, you're like, there's gonna be drums.
Yes.
It's a percussion show, or you just
Yes.
put out some gongs where people can see them, and everyone gravitates toward it. They're like, what is
So
that? They want
true.
to touch it. You know, it's like instant curiosity whenever drums and percussion is involved, visually and everything else.
It,
Culturally, where did those
absolutely.
things
Yes.
come from? What's the story? I mean, people ask that about all instruments, but with percussion, and especially with percussion ensembles, which I also do, there's just so many stories on the stage all at once,
Yes.
and people pick up on that right away.
And it is visceral. You see the percussionist pick up like 30 different instruments throughout the
Hmm.
course of it, and it's like, oh, what is this big gourd with like balls on it, or like what is this, different
Right.
kind of shaped of shaker, and then they're going on the tiny bongos and then big old congas, and like what, and it's all happening so quickly, and a lot of the audience, especially in a full band setting, might not be able to perceive everything that's going on percussion, because sometimes it's kind of buried, but in percussion ensemble it is front and center, and I think that's a beautiful thing that I think more people should experience, and that's really, I'm excited to dig more into kind of what you're working on there and what you've done in the past.
Yeah, for sure. And I try to bring that element into pop projects too,
Cool.
Adding layers of percussion and adding that visual element, and showcasing that in performance can work in a lot of different settings.
I agree. And like one of my favorite artists, Gilberto Gil,
Yep.
and he's kind of having a moment too. I'm hearing more of his music around, and it's like, for people that don't know, it's easiest way to describe him is like Brazilian Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So cool. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity for percussion to, shape the way that music sounds and feels in a deeper and richer way, especially as more cultures are connecting, as more genres and underrepresented or focused on musicians and musicians from history too are kind of bubbling up. I think that will influence where we're going in the future in really incredible ways.
Yeah, and I think another element of all that as a music scholar would be the difficulty that people have in even talking about percussion, or like I think there's not much scholarship, not much written scholarship on percussion, for example, compared to other instrumental groups and other music history. And I think part of that is like, composers, they don't even know how to write for a drum set, for example, right? Like it's almost like a secret language, and there are many secret languages that are affiliated with specific folkloric drum traditions, right? And I think that element is also present with drum set, just because of the way that it relates to the body, and you kind of have to be a drummer to really understand how the drums work, like the nuts and bolts of playing them. And I think that's part of why so many composers struggle to even create drum parts. Like I often tell them, if there's somebody that's notating something or creating an arrangement, I say, like, please don't fully notate the drum part. Because it's not going to probably be playable, just put like the accents that you want, indicate the style, if you've heard something else and you want to have a point of reference, that's great, or you can just say mambo or whatever, like Latin, I'll figure it out. I'll make it sound good. But like, if you try to fully notate it, like you can, like I can read it, but it's probably not going to sound as good as if you just give me an idea of what you want and let me just provide that, like, because unless they're a drummer.
Yes. Right. So true.
Right. Yeah.
And if they are a drummer, they'll probably know the edges of their limitations, and they'll know when to be like, do this.
Right. And I think it's in scholarship that it's getting better. Like more music writers are figuring out how to write about percussion without doing it in like Orientalist types of ways or whatever, like being more sophisticated about using language to describe percussion music. I think it's recently getting better. I actually have a few books here.
Cool.
That are all awesome recent books. This one, Rhythm Man, came out last year. It's about Chick Webb by Stephanie Crease. And Chick Webb is one of the more mysterious figures of early jazz and responsible for a lot of the ways that popular music now sounds globally, and there wasn't much on his life before, so this is new, really exciting.
Cool.
This book, Warren Smith, Autobiography, Crossing Borders and Playing with Pioneers, also really cool. I'm in the acknowledgments because I help him with his archives.
Sweet.
And he's played with everyone from like John Cage and Harry Parch in the 50s through like pop icons like Aretha Franklin. He toured with Barbra Streisand. He was Janis Joplin's arranger, and he also played with like Gil Evans, Miles Davis, had his own groups, Max Roach and Boom, which is my research. So this is a really fabulous little book about percussion. And then this one's a few years old, Kick It, A Social History of Drum Kit.
Cool.
Also recommended. So
Love it.
recommended reading.
Yes, I love that.
from Dr. Drums. Yeah, my nickname's also Dr. Drums.
Dr. Drums.
So yeah, that's
Sick.
Dr. Drums' recommended reading.
That's very good. That's very good. No, and I think that, like you're saying, there's such a misunderstanding with percussion and with styles, and so much, I don't know, out there that is so reductive, that kind of makes it be like, here is the clave. Maybe actually, could we go back? So say that somebody doesn't know anything about percussion, they just think it looks cool on stage and it makes them want to dance. Could you help me break it down to some of the essential elements so that when they see it next time, they might be able to latch onto something and be like, oh, okay, I feel that rhythmic pulse of the clave, or like I understand kind of like the way that they're trying to glue in and add different subdivisions to the kind of like overall picture of what the band is doing. Would you be down to do a little of that with me?
I mean, it all depends on the specifics of the music. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're talking about salsa,
Yeah.
or Afro-Cuban music, I mean,
Yeah.
oh man, there's so much. I mean, just clave, the social history of the clave. I mean, technologically speaking, claves come from ship pigs. They were
really?
actually
I didn't know
the
that.
pigs
Okay.
on slave ships.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so, so
Yes.
that was what the actual objects were at one time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's always like very real histories tied to these objects. So with Afro-Cuban music, you have to talk about the diaspora.
Mm.
So this is African diasporic music, and it's very much intercultural. So we have the element of the drum being a threatening thing in the early Americas, where it was banned for fear that enslaved Africans would use the drums as part of revolts, right? And there were revolts that happened anyway, and very few of them actually used drums.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple did. And then there was places where drums were allowed to be played by enslaved people or freed people of African descent, and those places primarily were like on the island of Cuba. There was more drumming allowed, so theoretically there might be more of a connection to African rhythms, but not necessarily, because people also use their bodies to tell the stories. Like there's a lot of body percussion or found objects, so like folkloric rhythms can be preserved without the instruments necessarily, right? In secret, but it does help to have physical drums and to be allowed to make music publicly, right?
Yes.
So it's just a different situation. And there was also the Congo Square in New Orleans, where there was some of that was allowed. And so these places, in New Orleans being a port city, so there's so much cultural exchange going in. It's not only the African diaspora, but we have the Asian diasporas, we have Native Americans and their music cultures. We have the music cultures of European peoples in the Americas. And then also another thing about salsa is that it also had so much development in New York City, right? So there's like so many different cultural elements going into that. So you can't really pin it down to any one thing, but just to be aware that it's a multiplicity of things. And yes, these rhythms are used for dancing. So I would recommend that someone that was new to salsa would watch some dancers.
Yes.
And get those movements from them. I think when you hear like a montuno, you kind of like automatically start dancing. But I don't know. I've never experienced it as someone that's never heard it, before. But maybe, watching dancers is good. And learning as much as you can about the histories is always really interesting. There's another great book about the history of Cuba and its music. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but maybe it came out about 10 years ago. It's a very long, awesome book. Yeah, so I would start there. Does that
That's
answer your
great.
question at all?
Yes, it totally did. And I love asking those kind of like bad questions because then I get great answers like that.
I'm like, I could try.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I know it's like it's such a loaded, brutal question, but I love hearing because that's what I was really trying to get to is that there is such a multiplicity of culture, interchange, different cities, different locations coming together, coming apart. It's
Yeah.
like some of the you listen to the old jazz giants and they talk about how jazz doesn't happen without New Orleans because it combines all of these things the rhythm of the swing in terms of like the marches and the dirges and how that
Yeah.
you don't so much of American music doesn't happen without that. And how do you even get there? It's the cultural exchange from African diaspora, and then like you were saying, everybody else kind of ending up in this port city that has some element of freedom ish, so you can make this music.
Right. Yeah, and those elements of rupture and
Yeah,
loss
rupture.
and pain, are all there too in the music because music
Yeah.
is a way of coping with uncontrollables and about people figuring out how to understand themselves in the world and also redefine and take control and empowerment over how they define themselves or ourselves and our communities, right? How we tell
Totally.
our stories.
Totally. And I
Hmm.
love doing that from the perspective of dance as well.
Yeah.
Some of my it's like some of my favorite tunes that are in Spanish. When you like learn the lyrics, they're incredibly sad. There's tales of suffering, but the music is so uplifting and joyous, and it's that
Yeah.
contradiction that's the
Hmm.
contradiction of life. Is the life is hard, but life is beautiful, and it's all wrapped
Hmm.
up in the same song. And I think that is just such a cool. Under celebrated, especially in the kind of like top 40 world that we live in. But it's growing, and it's cool to see it growing. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I would love to talk about kind of your musical journey once you get into college, and then kind of studying pedagogically and becoming a doctor. So
Sure.
yes, so I would love to kind of talk about the international percussion ensemble that you started, El Otro Lado,
Oh,
during
sure.
your graduate studies. Kind of like what motivated you to create that ensemble? What was kind of the impetus? And then what were some of the challenges, highlights, experiences from that?
So speaking of like cultural exchange and like experimentation, living
Yeah.
traditions, um, I have long been influenced by Max Roach. His work was the subject of my graduate studies, but long before that, in my undergrad, I was working with George Marsh, who is a really innovative educator who's developed this technique called inner drumming,
Okay.
and that's kind of like embodied mindfulness. It combines um, elements of Tai Chi, which is his physical practice or whatever his how he works out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And also drumming and like moving energy in the body, so like getting technique but also creating flow and melody. And he was very influenced by Max Roach, who's like widely acknowledged as being one of the most melodic drummers ever, who changed um, the role of drums, or who helped change it from a more rhythmic groove oriented thing to something that had a broader palette
Mm,
of expression, including melody, texture, timbre, really emphasizing the element of world percussion too. Um, so hey, let me just think. What was the initial question I'm addressing right now?
we were talking about El Otro Lado and kind
El
of the
Otro.
impetus. Yeah.
Okay, how we got to that?
Not yet.
Okay. So yeah, I was influenced by Max Roach for a very long time, and I was in grad school years later working with Anthony Davis, who's incredible mentor, and he said, you're into all of these jazz idioms. You also play chamber music, percussion ensemble music, and solo percussion. Why don't you look at Max Roach and Boom, which was his percussion ensemble that he created in around 1969, or was it 79? 69, I believe. So I said, okay. And then I started looking into that, and I realized that there was almost no scholarship on Boom, despite Max Roach being this huge figurehead of jazz history in American music, extremely important person. And I said, what's up with that? And that kind of plays into the idea that drumming is hard to write about. Like, people they hear it and they're like, okay, cool, the end, So there weren't any academic studies as far as I could tell. Um, all I could get was the press releases at the time, all of the things that had been published about them, because they were touring nationally and internationally for 25 years or so. So anyway, I dove into that. He helped me get in touch with two of the original members, Joe Chambers and Warren Smith, whose autobiography I just showed you, as well as Eli Fontaine, who joined later. Rest in peace. And I was able to interview the three of them and start working on creating this study, this ethnographic study of Boom, because it just kind of needed to be done. I didn't really need to do such a scholarly project since I was doing a performance degree, but I just really got into it and connected with especially Warren Smith, but also Joe and Eli. So anyway, through that work, I ended up getting a hold of some of the original Boom charts that were written by the different members, including Roy Brooks, Omar Clay, Warren and Joe. And so I was able to get those charts put into the library at UCSD. They were not circulating or available before, and a lot of percussionists have been interested in playing that music, Totally. So in the interest of doing justice to the music, because as a performance major, of course, I'm going to also play it. I put together this international band. Why? Because Boom, I guess I'm going about this story kind of backwards, but they came together as kit players who were tired of being at the back of the band, who wanted a broader range of expression, who wanted better acknowledgement, who wanted to elevate the status of jazz culturally, of the Black avant-garde, who were doing some of the same things sonically as the European kind of descended composers and performers and that Eurocentric circles were doing. And of course, there's intersection between them, but not enough acknowledgement. And I think they kind of got a little bit pigeonholed. So they wanted to really bring that up, and, show it as also being high art and, deserving of recognition. So they started creating their own repertoire of music just for percussion. And they had like a whole orchestral setup, with xylophones, marimbas, vibraphones. They had a melodic saw. They had timpani. They had tubular bells, everything. And it was this crazy experience that they put together. So I wanted to play this music, and I wanted to also show that kind of cultural exchange, that element of encounter that happens not only through the instruments coming together, right, and their stories and all that mystery there, but also the different players and their backgrounds. They were mostly African American men, so they had that in common, and they were jazz musicians, but they came from different parts of the country, and they wanted that African element, which they didn't have because the diaspora had cut them off, from knowing the real folkloric traditions of Africa. So the way that they got connected was actually not through hiring an African musician, but hiring a Latin American musician. I can't remember what the first one was, but they ended up with Ray Mantilla. They had a guy for a while, it didn't work out, but they ended up with Ray Mantilla for a very long time. And because the African element, is perceivably so much stronger in like Central and South America, that was a more direct connection, to some of those rhythms of that hemisphere. So that encounter brought it to that level. So for me, I wanted to create a new and different experience because I wasn't trying to do an imitation or whatever. So I did my own arrangements. And I happen to be somebody who works a lot in Mexico. And I have a lot of contacts and friends down there. I like to do some teaching and working with students in Mexico too. So I just thought, like, it'd be really cool to do this cross-border thing, to have this bring this encounter element really into the foreground. And so that was how I presented the music, if
Love
that
that.
makes sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah,
And I love the fundamental like San Diego nature of that as well. Being a border
definitely.
town. That's very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So how did you end up? So that's the impetus. That's how you formed it, and then so now you're finding players, you're finding people to join this ensemble, you're arranging, and then what's your first performance? What was the first time that you kind of took this out and shared it with the public?
Well, this band did a live concert at UC San Diego, which was recorded and documented. And this was one of my concerts for the doctorate in musical arts degree. So that was the only concert that we did with that specific lineup. I've
Yeah.
played with all those players on different gigs, and
Oh,
I've
cool.
played this music with different gigs. But El Otro Lado was formed specifically for that purpose and to create that live recording that we later released. I would love to book the band again,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that'll be the case. I currently play with another percussion ensemble that's called The Forest now, and that's actually based in New York City. So, and it's mainly touring. It's not like we do gigs all the time because we have to travel, but we do like a couple tours a year, and we've played a lot of this same music plus our own compositions, but it's in the spirit of Boom, the Art Ensemble of Chicago, you know, um, also Eli Fontaine's Percussion Discussion, and some of the stuff that Joe Chambers has done since Boom, and there's some other projects as well. But of bringing together that kind of like timbral mix of percussion ensemble and doing it mostly acoustically.
Cool.
Yeah, and within the spirit of experimentation, with everybody involved as a cooperative, and everyone being like performer, composer, improvisers, just in general, everyone just being all around musicians, right?
Yes. Triple
Yeah,
threat.
right. But although I don't really think of it as different things,
I do. I agree. I agree.
music has been compartmentalized
Yes.
by academia, by the music industry, because we need ways to like sell things and to like organize students into programs. But in reality, music is all of these things at once. And yeah, I don't really think, oh, right now I'm performing, now I'm improvising, now I'm composing, like it's not like that. It's just like I'm musicking.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
And I think that that's part of us, getting cut off from even the recent past of like classical composers, and you think it's so regimented and you have to play it exactly like the paper. It's like they didn't, y'all, they
They
were
didn't,
improvising
yeah.
their own pieces. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That whole thing of reproducing scores like a museum is like an invented tradition. But I mean, all traditions are invented. So,
Right? Yeah.
okay. I mean, guys,
Totally.
that's valid too. It's just as valid as anything else. It was invented by people who used it to serve their own purposes. Um, that's how traditions are. But for me, it's less interesting than when I get to have a creative voice as well.
Yes, and speaking of that, the role of improvisation when you are, arranging for a group like this, how do you build that in, and how do you kind of like play with that give and take, just like jazz, where you kind of have like set sections, you have room for players to express themselves a little bit more. Like how do you kind of navigate that in your pieces?
Yeah, so my work with El Otro Lado as well as with The Forest, and I see them kind of on a continuum of my work in percussion ensemble genre, I guess. I don't know if it's a genre. Uh, Configuration.
Configuration,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
we use a little bit of the lead sheet. Some of it's like lead sheets, right? So there'll be a melody, harmony, a groove, and improvisation sections. But then on top of that, there'll be other sections. Like it's like more complex than like just straight out of a real book. But
Yeah.
it's the same kind of idea of a lead sheet a lot of the time. There's also pieces that have just like written instructions where, this, do this, then do that, then do this, then do that. Or like little cells, right? Like there'll be one cell with a rhythm and a groove, and then after a certain thing happens, you go to the next one, or there's a cue, or whatnot. We don't tend to use like extra heavily notated stuff, and not that we couldn't, like we can, but it's just not really how we want to spend our time. We have to think about our strengths.
Yeah.
So just to create a roadmap of some kind that gives you the form, and then every time it's different, and you're trusting in your collaborators to be able to make musical decisions, and not everything, like maybe somebody will all of a sudden be playing a flexitone out of nowhere because they thought that sounded good. It's not necessarily in the score, and that comes also with playing together and trying things and seeing what works, and just picking the right people to work with.
I love that. And then in terms of like cueing, that's kind of like going around the circle, or is that is like the band leader kind of progressing, or a combination of both?
When you say going around the circle, do you mean like everyone gets a solo or something?
No,
like
yeah, sort of.
Like in a quartet?
Right, yeah, exactly. But more like, are you passing the baton of, who's deciding form length, or who's going to the next section, or is there more of a central band leader, so to speak, that is determining, hey, let's move to the next stage of that roadmap?
Yeah, so with El Otro Lado, that was like a little bit less collaborative. I was musical directing for that. So I chose like there'll be a timpani solo on this piece, or like a xylophone solo on that piece. And we're not trying to be totally egalitarian, because aesthetically that might not sound quite as good, or like the way that we are maybe egalitarian is not super, super obvious.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
sometimes when you go see a jazz quartet, they do like the same solo order. It's like the pianist, and then the guitar, and then the bass, and maybe the drums, or maybe not, or maybe we trade fours, or maybe we don't.
Right.
So definitely not like that in this case. But yeah, so I just kind of spread it around, and I had other priorities because I was presenting a recital for a degree, so I had to also like showcase myself like in a certain way, because that's like required. But I also didn't want to do that in a way that didn't vibe with the group, so I also didn't make that super blatant or crazy. But then moving on with the Forest, which is a totally cooperative percussion quintet, and that one was formed deliberately so because the five of us wanted that. And that's a group that features Andrew Drury, Leslie Mock, Michael Wimberly, and Gustavo Aguilar. And we also will kind of trade who's the musical director, right?
Cool. Okay.
So this is something that can shift. And again, it's not like everyone solos every song in the same order. Yeah. So we pass the baton in terms of who's in charge. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Max Roach did with Boom, right?
Yeah.
He got all these musicians who, by the way, were a lot younger than him.
Mm-hmm.
So, right? So he's smart. He's keeping it fresh. He wants to know what the kids are doing. They were at least 15 years younger. Like the oldest other members of Boom were at 15 years younger than Max. And then they even got younger members than that, right? Mm-hmm. And the Forest is also intergenerational. We have Leslie, I think, is in their 20s still. They might be 30 now. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're still in their 20s. I'm in my 30s, and then the other three are, I think, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I also really enjoy that intergenerational collaboration.
Definitely.
Being in any position, whether I'm working with young people or people older than me, kind of like approaching middle age now. It's like, I'm in a different position generationally. This is interesting, you know? Yeah. But that's also like a really cool thing about music, is that it can allow people to connect also across ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, gender differences, whatever, and generational differences, which to me recently has been interesting.
Pardon the interruption. I just wanted to invite you guys to check out my merch store. It's a great way to support the pod and rep it. We've got Love Music More merchandise. We've got Scoobert Doobert merchandise. And I'm super, super excited to announce we have a vinyl record coming very soon. My very first one. And I can't wait to share it with you. It's going to be called I, like the letter I. And we should have it in hand like mid to late June. So definitely, start bookmarking on your calendars. It's a amazing way to support the pod, and also a great way to get some vinyl records like I have behind me, immortalize the music, and also rep the pod, get some shirts and stuff like that. So check out scoobertdoobert.pizza to learn more and visit the merch store. And that whole universal language, I know that it's a bit of a cliche, but it is very real. And one of the things I do really like about percussion ensembles or percussion drum kind of duets is how viscerally you're able to hear the musical conversation. There's always a musical conversation going on depending on whatever the arrangement of the combo or whatever is. But I think it's just easier for the audience to get it like, oh, they played a rhythm and then they played a rhythm back. And then now they're improvising on that rhythm and they passed it over. Like this person's doing the grid and this person's doing a solo on top and now they flipped. I think that's it's an easy way, I think, just as even if you're not a trained musician or whatever, to be like, oh, I understand the concept of musical conversation.
Yeah. And that what you just said brings up two thoughts. One I just wrote this down, but one has to do with the question of universality, which is a very complex question, by the way. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, music being a universal language.
Hit me.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay, but let me first say the shorter thing, what you just said about passing things around or whatever. We realize in listening to or in learning more about our audiences, right? Because they're not like necessarily trained musicians. They're going to be hearing things differently from us. And that brings up all the question of universality, right?
Yes.
But we learned sometimes you have to let an idea go on for longer because people are dealing with so much new information sonically, like new timbres, new textures, new combinations of different timbres into another new timbre, and different rhythms and patterns. Like people don't necessarily hear it if it goes by too quickly. We might hear it because we do music all day and we obsess about it. And so we hear things in that way. But yeah, I've learned do things longer. And I think that's good advice for a lot of musicians who have very highly developed ears to remember that it takes people maybe an extra few seconds than you might think to hear what's going on. So you can stick with an idea and make sure it's going to be heard. And then the question of universality, we all hear differently, we all see differently. So it depends on how you define that, right? Like, so you could say it's not because everyone interprets things in their own way, but you could also say that it is if anything is like either if it's insofar as it's possible to be universal at all, right? Because like we all see differently too. So I guess that it just depends how you define that. And obviously when you go to listen to music that you've never been exposed to from a totally different culture,
gamelan.
You hear something. Gamelan is what you said? Yeah, gamelan's amazing. You so hear it. Like I don't know. Is it universal or not? Like, you know what I mean? I talk to my students about this all the time. I mean, I guess like language isn't, or is it? Maybe it is too, because you understand tone. Like you get something out of it.
I get that. Well, also, I mean, the language part is the thing that makes it sit a little bit better with me, because language, even both of us speaking, I'm assuming that English is your first language.
It is.
So we have a certain level of, cultural, and we're both San Diegans. There's like a jumping off point by which our language might be more accurately conveyed to one another. However, there is some fidelity loss, regardless of how much we have in common, be it vocabulary or culture. And then as you lose vocabulary and culture similarities, or even the similarities of concepts of like religion or mind, body, or soul, or all of these things. Like now it becomes more difficult. You say the same word and it's packed with different context. And so like I agree with you, but like language will never be universal. And so that's why I feel like the idea of like music is as efficient-ish as language would be, should you attempt it cross-culturally.
But like, for example, I teach world music, and I'll play my students like a clip of a UA, I think that's how you pronounce it, UA funeral, and I don't tell them what it is.
No,
because
cool. Yes.
Yeah, because it's actually like a big party, right?
Yeah,
and I'm like,
right.
What do you guys think is going on here? Like, is it a birthday? Like, is it a wedding? And none of them really ever guess funeral unless they're familiar with West African cultural practices. And so every once in a while they will say, it's a funeral. I'm like, but so like, is that really universal if you totally interpret it as being something totally different?
Right. No, that's a really good point. Yeah, if you raise somebody outside of like major and minor scale, would they be like, that one's happy, that one's sad?
No.
Probably
not. No. And if you play orchestral music for someone that's never heard it, they think it sounds terrible.
Yeah, right. Right. Or like, like, are you like horses, like chariot racing or whatever, if you don't have like the million movie scores that use that to associate it in your brain as horses or galloping.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's like, but you could associate it with a million other things. Oh, like that's a waterfall. It's falling. Like, I don't know. You can create your own associations, or like gamelan music, like tonality. The idea of dissonance versus consonance. Are those things baked into the human psyche? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, in gamelan music, they use rhythmic. We share rhythmic similarities. Like, they have this system called irama, which basically subdivides everything in two. Right. So it's like there's the big beat, which is like 64. Then there's another one, 32, and then 16, and then 8, and then 4, and then 2, and then 1. Right. So this process of doubling, which we also have in Western music. So I would just say, is music universal? Like, kinda, sorta. Sometimes, or maybe it's more. It can be cross-cultural, or it can be a bridge.
Yes.
But I wouldn't say with absolute certainty that it's necessarily universal. But I also don't think anything is universal. So
yeah. Well, but maybe that's the most. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah. Like, I teach cultural relativity, like, because that's, you do this podcast in a way to promote the value of music and also the humanities and the arts, right? And so I emphasize the same thing in my teaching, like, because I do general education a lot of the time. And so a lot of that is just reinforcing why the humanities are important, even if you're not a musician, and hoping that the students will carry that sense of value into their lives somehow, fingers crossed.
Yes, and be able to step outside of themselves to some degree and be able to recognize, even concepts like universality. But what I was going to say is, I think that might be the most universal sense of it all, is that, like, the Einstein quote, God does not play dice. It's like, actually, yeah, he does. And like, the more we look at the universe itself, the more we recognize kind of our place in it is not that of preeminence or domination. It is like, rather, we are just part of this. That doesn't invalidate us. That doesn't mean that we don't matter. Shouldn't throw you into existential dread, but it should instead make you like rethink what it is to be in the humanities. And that's what I like about this subject, even if you're not playing a musician, like playing music. Just the act of participation and attending concerts and just soaking this in, I think, can fundamentally change the way your brain works, change the way that you kind of interact with your culture and other cultures.
Well, yeah, I mean, we know this from neuroscience. Like, our brains are constantly reforming their neural pathways, like, even as we speak right now. So, like, anytime you hear a melody, it changes how you hear the next melody. Right? Even if it's in a tiny way, it changes how I'm going to play on my instrument. What types of things have been processed through my ear-brain connection, recently.
And drums is the ultimate I think that's part of the reason why it's so freaking hard for people to play is that your brain has to change. Like you can't just logically understand what the drummer is doing and then go do it.
Right. No, exactly. It's an embodied practice. And so that's a challenge for the composers and everybody. They just don't know how to do it. And yeah, like drummers in secrecy, you have to learn from another drummer. And when I teach I teach world music, one of my topics. So when we go over Africa, we talk about different drumming cultures and like drum languages and how, if you want to be a drummer, you have to go where the drummers are and you have to learn from them. And so like, there's no particular universal language per se, but the only constant in the universe is change, and our ability to shift and change and try to develop some distance from ourselves and understanding that we all create our own realities through the way that our five senses work. That is actually, I guess, a universal experience, right? That we all create our own realities, and in understanding that, and it helps us relate to other forms of expression, including music.
I agree. And I like the, kind of mythic nature of that concept too. Like I was reading a quote from Paul McCartney, and he was talking about someone in Liverpool learned how to play a B7 chord, and he didn't have so they took the bus to go discover this magic, and they took it back and they showed all of their friends, this is a B7 chord. It's a good chord, right? And think about what the Beatles would be without a B7 chord. You use that thing at crap ton. But I love the idea of like, I have this sorcerer knowledge kind of thing, and like I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna grab a little bit of it and take it back, and then I can share it with someone else. And in the face of like the internet, where you feel like all knowledge is open and it's
encoded. It's encoded knowledge. You have to decode it.
Yes, and the loss of fidelity thing, like we were talking about. There's a difference. Like I appreciate us being able to have this conversation through technology. That's wonderful. But I do think that we would be having an even deeper deeper conversation without the technology. We were just in the same room hanging out. And even if we took away the whatever impact of having microphones and an audience, we'd have an even deeper conversation still. And so it's funny how it's so easy to take the mimesis, take the thing that ends up being transmitted and treat that as the real thing, versus the intimate personal knowledge that something like drumming, like that embodied practice, can help recenter you and question all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I love about being a musician that primarily works in acoustic modes. Although I love the mallet cat. The mallet cat is really cool. But it's right there. You can't have a technical difficulty with the drum. I mean, I guess you can break a head or something, but it's just right there, and you just hit it. You can feel it. You can't be on your phone while you're playing drums because your hands are full.
Yes. And
you have to be in your body.
You have to be present, otherwise you're going to suck. There's some drummers that are good enough. Maybe you probably are, but for me, I got to be like fully there. Otherwise, my time's just going to start doing this, drifting up and down.
Oh yeah, I focus hard. Even in music that's quote unquote easy. I don't think any music is easy because you have to bring that focus to it.
Yes. And it's so interesting how it is very Zen, where I don't know if people have ever done those like blowing things where there's like a ball in a tube, and you don't want to blow it too hard because then it'll hit the other end of the tube. You don't want to blow it too soft and the ball will come there. You just try to make it hover in between. And I feel like that's what playing music is for me. If I'm too focused, if my face is pinched and I'm like really like I am a real musician doing musical stuff, I don't play in a captivating, emotional, effortless way. If I am too lackadaisical, I am all over the place and I'm sloppy. It is that sweet spot right in between where I am present but not, pinched. That's where I actually sound good. And it's hard to find. It's so easy to drift on either side.
You have to check in with your body regularly, but not in a way that you become so obsessive that you become tense.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a really good one. And it's crazy how much I had these sections, I'd play a solo or do something, especially in music school. I wouldn't breathe. It
Yeah.
took a teacher to be like, yo, dude, you haven't taken a breath for the last like 20 seconds. It's like,
Yep.
what's wrong with you?
I know. I know. You should try inner drumming.
Yeah, I should.
Um,
I should.
yeah.
I've gotten
It's
better at
cool.
it, but it's still it's a constant constant effort. And
Yeah, just breathe. Just breathe normally.
yeah, right.
It's hard enough. It's hard
It
enough.
is.
Just breathe normally. You don't have to do anything fancy. Just breathe normally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get so much better. I think it's similar with like athletics too. People that get too in their head go too far off, or the people that don't practice technique, they get hurt. It's that sweet spot in between where you're loose but you're focused, you're intense but you're not like overdoing it, exaggerated. I'll check out inner drumming. I will.
Yeah, and part of it is also practicing for safety. Like I also work with dancers and they do certain things where they train as if they're going to fall, right? So like one way that people roll their ankle, common injury. So you practice putting weight in that direction and how you're going to deal with it if you do fall so
cool.
that it doesn't happen. And same thing with drumming too, right? Like working on getting all these motions to be really fluid, so that you're not putting crazy pressure on your joints, and things like that, is really helpful because we all have bodies and that's not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so easy to think that someone else is just like immortal or imperfect because you see them and you're like, wow, they play 3 gigs a day. It's no problem. But you don't know that they're dealing with tendonitis and carpal tunnel and all these other things. Like nobody's perfect. It's just people can.
Yeah. And they might be meditating and visualizing too, and using those tools. I mean, those are really great tools. Athletes use meditation and visualization. It's great for musicians too. I recommend.
And I love the comparisons with I don't know, sports science or sports psychology with music, because we're doing 2 very similar but very different things of connecting with your body and your mind, and it's
I get that from George and the inner drumming. For me, it's swimming that I use for my kind of full body exercise. It's so good for the joints too.
Definitely.
Like it's gentle but also amazing workout. But it doesn't have to be that. There's all kinds of ways. But yeah, it's important to stay in shape.
I agree.
To be a musician. Yeah. Because your body is really what is your instrument, really.
Yep. I really let myself slip for a while, where I was going to grad school, I was doing all the things, and I had a lot of inflammation. Everything was harder. Took me years to get back where I feel good about my body, but just doing those little things, now everything else gets easier. So I recommend it too. It's difficult and it should take a long time because that's how it works. But just the act of doing really helps everything else.
Yeah, like especially after you're 30 and older, you don't really have a choice. Like working out is not optional.
Right.
Right. If you don't do it, there's going to be consequences like within a week.
Yeah. And then the inverse consequences are brilliant, because you end up getting in like a positive feedback loop rather than a negative feedback loop. And it gets easier as you do it the next day rather than it gets harder to start.
It gets easier. You get younger.
Yeah.
You get happier. Yeah, for sure. But it's definitely hard getting back into it when you get too busy and 3 weeks go by and you're like, oh crap, I'm out of shape.
Yep. Seriously. No. And the hardest thing is restarting and like forgiving yourself for being human and then just starting again. It's very difficult to do, but
for sure.
That hopefully that gives some people some good vibes to know that everybody deals with that, and take it from this podcast.
It's hard. But try to let go of like self-blame and guilt, and just get back into it.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. So I have 2 final questions. The first one before we do the big question is I'd love to talk about just San Diego real quick. So I grew up in Bonita and then kind of like La Costa area. And then I went to USC for music, and then I came back to San Diego. Just curious about your kind of like San Diego journey, your connection with the community there. And I love hearing about the cross-border stuff. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Dago.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, there's so much more. Like I really enjoyed going to school at UC San Diego, which is where I went. I
Yeah.
studied with Steve Schick. Also, like I mentioned, Anthony Davis. I did work with Mark Dresser and Steph Richards, all amazing. But one of the best things about San Diego was the local community. And I, from early in my, grad studies career, it was important to me to be doing work off campus. So, one of the bigger projects that I did was called Voices of Our City Choir. And that is a performing ensemble, a professional performing ensemble for people experiencing homelessness. And that was something that I helped to start along with Steph Johnson and Nina Deering, RIP. And we started that group in 2015. And so it's become like a resource and social platform for a lot of our unsheltered neighbors here.
Yes.
And the choir's actually been in a PBS documentary. They made it to the semifinals of America's Got Talent. So I was like their original board president because they need someone to do that, but also their drummer.
Cool.
And so that was a really great process of like getting to know people from all kinds of different backgrounds and just really helping people help themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because when we were out volunteering because it was summer and there was heat waves and people needed water and we were giving out bandanas and bananas and stuff. And that's when we realized that a lot of people were also musicians. A lot of the unsheltered people were musicians just like us. And like, not to conflate being an artist and being extremely poor, but we are ourselves like one or two steps away from homelessness sometimes, being these precarious careers. So there was a lot of empathy there. So anyway, that was one of my bigger projects that I did here. And one that I'm currently still doing is called Baby Bushka. And Baby Bushka is an 8-piece, all-female, virtuoso band that does our own versions of the music of Kate Bush. And that's been a band since about 6 years. We have toured nationally and internationally. And so that's a really important project to me and the community here. Also, just I live in City Heights.
Yeah.
So I had like a communal type of house here for about 10 years or so. And then I left and came back not too long ago because I've just been going back and forth. So I love City Heights.
Yeah, City Heights is awesome.
Really, really amazing community here. Super diverse. Yeah, so City Heights is like my neighborhood in San Diego. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. I lived in North Park for a while. I absolutely loved it, and then it got too expensive for me.
Yeah, well, I've always done house shares. Yeah, so I have a house share here again. It's different, and I also have a house share in New England because at the moment I'm an adjunct professor at Springfield College. So I'm there during the academic semester.
Cool. Love that.
Yeah, but that's super part-time, so I still perform and tour even during the semester because I only teach one class in person and the other one's online. So, yeah.
Cool. I love the blend. No, it's great. And I love this too, because I know that we have some of our audience that's like kind of younger looking at what our careers in music really like. And I love hearing kind of about that tapestry of, this is how you make it work.
Yeah, I mentor a lot of young musicians today, and it's common advice like if you can do anything else besides music, probably you should do that. Right. I would encourage you to do something else because you'll make more money and you'll be able to have like a family and like own property maybe or something. But like if you feel that you must be a musician, then by all means be a musician, because that's what happened to me. It wasn't necessarily the most financially smart thing to do. So as an independent artist and freelancer, I also do a lot of work in Los Angeles with bands that will contract me for like a gig or two or a short tour or whatever. You really have to do all the work. You have to be your own manager. You have to be your own promoter. You have to be your own agent. A lot of times, I mean, sometimes you can get an agent if you're lucky, but The majority of musicians don't even have that. And for me, as somebody who's also a scholar, I'm totally independent, and I do a lot of work. I probably make $5 an hour at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just part of it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely a tough road.
Yes. Yeah. I know. Gone are the days where, you'd get on like Michael Jackson's tour and he'd give you like 150K retainer and, you just wait for the next tour.
I'm still waiting for Beyonce to call me. Like
Hell
she
yeah.
does like to hire all female bands.
Yeah.
More people are doing that now. A lot of the gigs I get are
Uh-huh.
because people not because they want female drummer, but
Mm-hmm.
that's like one of the things. And then they end up hiring me. Not like there aren't other women to choose from, right? So I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it's becoming more of a thing where people want to have women in their bands, and I
Definitely.
love that because I've been in so many bands where I was the only woman for so
Mm-hmm.
many years.
Mm-hmm.
That now that there's people are prioritizing that a little more. It's cool. It's exciting. Yeah.
I agree. Sorry to interrupt this very important broadcast, but it's time for one more advertisement for myself for this podcast. What I'm asking for is for you to rate it 5 stars, share it with your friends. This is like the most important thing for this podcast to grow. So if you want to do this, you go onto the podcast screen, right? You click on the ... on Spotify. Under there, it says rate show, and you go and you click it. 5 stars. If you could do that for me, that's the best way for the algorithms and all this stuff to share it out with the world. I know that it's a lot to ask, but if you could please just hit those 3 dots and then a 5 star, it would really help us out and helps us, get the word out and spread the love of music. So thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. And here's the rest of the episode. Okay, so the big question.
Okay,
This is the one we like to kind of end every pod with. So the show is called Love Music More, and the segment's called Love Music Why. This is just an opportunity to kind of like speak to somebody that is considering starting music, or somebody that might be down on music right now, and just kind of tell them why you keep doing it. Why do you love music? Why does this nourish your soul and your community? And why are you so passionate about it, even in the face of economic like realities and everything else? Like, why do you keep coming back to it? Why do you love it so much? And why do you want to do this for the rest of your life?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So let's start with, why do I love music? The reason I love music, I think, is because of the way that it combines mystery and accessibility. Right? These are things that you'd think would be like opposed to one another, but really they're not. Right? That combination of mystery and accessibility is endlessly stimulating for me. And as somebody who has had the fortunate experience of having great musical mentors, they've really instilled in me this sense of having like a continuous learner mindset, a lifelong learner mindset. So because of that combination of mystery and accessibility, there's always something to learn. There's always something to be curious about, whether that's on my own part or maybe thinking through ways of connecting with others or learning about how other people hear things versus how I do. Or there's just always so much to learn. It can be overwhelming and even distracting sometimes, but that's why I love it. And that mystery of not only drums and percussion, but all music. Like there's always something we don't quite understand about it, right? It's not any one thing, and it's not even a physical thing. And I mean, I'm not saying there isn't physical objects associated with music. We got instruments, we have vinyl, we have, these technologies we're communicating through right now. So there are physical objects that are part of it, but the music itself, that sound, that vibration is invisible, and that is mysterious, like this, that it's just this sound wave, vibrating in the air, and then plus the mystery of the way that we hear things differently, the way that every instrument has a story, the way that there are millions and millions of different folkloric traditions and ways of intersecting and creating something new out of something old. It's just endless. And also that accessibility element reinforces my feeling that music is for everyone, regardless of whether or not you're going to be a professional performer. Like me, you can be a part-time performer. You can just do it by yourself. You can just do it with your friend. You can join a choir. Like, music is for everyone. If you're interested, there's ways to do it. So I would never want to discourage anyone from doing music. So that's the difference between pursuing music professionally and being a musician. You can be a musician and be a professional at something else.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just as valid.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to music is a form of making music too. So there are people who don't play an instrument, don't sing. Maybe they wish they did. Maybe they say things like, I wish I practiced. I never, you know, people say this to me all the time, you know, and I'm like, do you make playlists? Then
Mm-hmm.
you're a musician, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Do you pick and choose what you're going to listen to, you know, in your free time? Do you share an album that you liked with somebody else, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Then you are doing music.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yes.
And listeners are just important as music makers. Like, you know, we need both.
Exactly. And each one informs the other. And I love like your idea with you know, asking listeners, hey, what did you grasp? What did you like? And then coming away with the idea of let's develop the motif a little bit more. Let's use a little bit more repetition. Let's allow for the complexity of the timbral things that we're used to wash over the audience, and then they can grasp the melodic or ideas or whatever,
right.
And then we can move on.
We might hear it all at once.
Yes,
and that's fine, and that's great. Like, good for us, you know. We love it, but they might need to hear it in sequence or spread out more.
Yes, totally. Well, that's one of the things that I like was the light bulb moment for me with mixing music, is that I realized when stuff comes in, it's got to come in loud. Like, if it's a new idea, I need to be like, hey, look at me over here. And then it can fade into the background. But it cannot just like subtly kind of creep in there where a musician would be like, ooh, nice little pad. That's smooth. The listener will be like, didn't hear it. Wasn't there. Like, hey, that thing that you spent 6 hours making, no one heard it. You know, like being bombastic and making big choices and being like, listen to me, this is cool. And then it can fade into the background. That was like a little bit of a moment for me to just, I don't know, make more accessible music, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want them to notice it, unless you want them to not notice it and just be subtly affected by it, because that's a mixing thing too.
Yeah, totally a choice, and that's totally cool. I do stuff like that like crazy, like reverbs. It's like, I don't even want you to know that there's a reverb, but there's a reverb kind of situation. Right. But if it's like a part, it's like a hook, it's a new musical idea that adds this texture to this whole thing. It's like, play it loud, play it proud, get it out there. Make it so that when a new character enters the stage, it's like Kramer from Seinfeld, like oh, there it is, can't miss him.
Bust in the door without knocking, right?
Exactly.
I love Kramer. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, companies or whatnot, when they're making a product, they'll do like what is it called when they have people try it?
A focus group.
Yeah. A focus group. So like, as a creator, why wouldn't you ask somebody with different ears from you what they're hearing?
Yeah. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Dr. Drums, for coming on here.
Thank you so much.
Dropping all this knowledge.
Thank you.
This is really fun. Anything else you'd like to add that listeners might be able to come check out a live set or catch up with you on the socials? Yeah,
and maybe I'll email you this info too. But
I'll drop it in the bio.
So a few things are happening. This coming up weekend, May 31st to June 2nd, I'll be playing in a chamber opera in San Diego. The composer's Carolyn Chen. That's gonna be at Bread and Salt, and it will sell out. So if you're interested, definitely get a ticket soon. That should be very exciting. It's a world premiere. Baby Bushka will be performing again in September in
Okay.
San Diego and LA. So check out Baby Bushka and maybe follow us if you're interested in it, because that's a little while off. And also doing an Ireland and UK tour,
Sweet.
September into October. And then if you're in New York this summer, on June 16th at the Andrew Friedman Home in the Bronx, we are doing a 90th birthday concert for Warren Smith, founding member of Max Roach's percussion ensemble, Boom Boom, which will be a concert celebrating the release of his autobiography, Crossing Borders and Playing with Pioneers, as well as the release of my percussion ensemble's new album. So my percussion ensemble, The Forest, featuring Warren Smith and JD Paran, two treasures of New York City musical history, just very amazing heavy hitters at that event. So that'll be June 16th at the Andrew Friedman Home in the Bronx. We're also celebrating Father's Day. Warren Smith is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah, and Juneteenth also we're going to be celebrating. And the very last thing, this summer, Cosmo Gold, which is a really cool band out of LA, is releasing a film produced by Filmatics. I don't know what I think it's called Cosmo Gold Krong. I think it's called Krong. And that'll be a really cool music film. And I'm on percussion in that too. So I'm very excited about all of these things coming up.
Love that. Definitely go check that out. And where could listeners follow you or stay tuned for stuff maybe for next year?
Definitely. My Instagram handle is at Leah B Drums, Leah B Drums. You can also find more information about me and listen to things on my website, which is leahbowden.com. But staying tuned, I would recommend to do through Instagram. Cool. I always post concert announcements as well as fun music content. I make little drum trivia videos and different things. I do a percussion cam, so you can get a up close and personal.
Yes.
What it's like being at the back of the band sometimes. So yeah, I hope to see some of you on the socials.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Leah. Really appreciate the great conversation. Ton to chew on in here. I'm definitely going to be thinking about this all week. So thank you for all this inspiration.
Thank you too. I'll be thinking about it as well. We'll be in touch later.
Yes, please. Awesome.
Take care. All right. Take care. Bye.